Hi, my name's Don, and I'm the guy that's trying to be the Sly Strategist. Today, we're going to cover two conditions that, in my mind, are a little bit more sticky than they are in some other systems, and that would be dying and wounded. What I mean by sticky is that in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you really can't have someone die, heal them, they'll pop right back up, and then you repeat that cycle throughout the whole entire fight, and everything is going to be fine. There are limits to dying and being wounded in Pathfinder, and we're going to go ahead and cover that in this video here. So to start, we're going to go ahead and say that all creatures and objects have hit points in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And most creatures would be permanently dead once they reach 0 hit points. There are exceptions, and the exceptions are players, companions, and any significant NPCs that are part of the story. And that includes some monsters that have certain conditions or certain traits that might allow them to regenerate hit points. There is regeneration and fast healing. There are things that you can do for these creatures with these traits, certain attacks that you can do that will pause this regeneration and allow them to go further down in the dying condition. However, it is very unlikely for them to ever get below a dying 3. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're go ahead and doing your fights. There you might come across something that's a little bit harder to kill than you might think it is. One thing I will say though is that creatures, and this includes players, cannot be reduced below 0 hit points. Once someone reaches 0 hit points, there is no negative. There are some things that will happen if you were to take a massive amount of damage at one time, and we'll get to that towards the end of this video. But just keep in mind that you cannot go below 0 hit points. 0 hit points is pretty much as far as you go. So the other thing we'll say about this introduction here to dying, that's a heck of a title to start with, but with this little introduction to dying, is when most creatures reach 0 hit points, they die and they're rendered unconscious immediately. And they start incurring the dying condition unless it was done specifically with non-lethal damage. There are certain weapons that have the trait non-lethal, so you can just knock the person unconscious without actually taking them into dying. But it's a special condition, and it's something that you usually do intentionally. So with that, we're going to now go into what actually happens when you reach 0 hit points with a lethal attack. So in the unfortunate case that you do reach 0 hit points with a lethal attack, this is what's going to happen. First thing that's going to happen is you're going to be knocked unconscious. You're going to fall prone and drop everything that you have, and you can take no actions whatsoever. You are going to immediately incur the conditions of blinded and flat-footed. You're also going to suffer a -4 penalty to your armor class, to your perception, and to your reflex saves. And any healing that you get done that would raise you above 0 hit points will immediately render you conscious, and you'll be able to act upon your next turn. However, you have to pick everything up that you dropped that wasn't basically strapped to you. So you're going to lose a couple actions here and there. Also, you will immediately move your initiative to right before the thing that gave you the dying condition. So if a creature attacked you, your initiative order is going to move immediately before the creature that attacked you. This gives you one full round in order for you or members of your party to do something before you start having to do recovery checks and then going further and further down the dying condition. So you're going to get that full, total and complete round in order to attempt to do something to get out of it. You do gain the dying condition and increase your dying condition by whatever your prior wounded condition was. We haven't really introduced wounded yet. We are going to get into that a little bit further on. But if you die multiple times without being healed to full and giving the 10 minutes rest or having a treat wounds done on you, then for every dying condition you have, once you regain consciousness, you're going to add that to your wounded condition. So you would if this is your second time being dead before recovering all your wounded conditions, you would not go to dying 1 initially, you would go to dying 2. The other case where you can skip from just that +1 is if it was a critical that caused it to happen. Critical success, you had a critical strike hit on you, you would immediately go to dying 2 versus dying 1. And in your recovery checks, if you critically failed, then as opposed to just dropping down 1 and dying, you would actually drop 2. So it's a little bit scary. But let's say you go through that entire round and no one was able to get to heal to you. You didn't use hero points in order to try and come out of the dying condition. Now you're going to begin your recovery checks. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with that. So before you hit dying 4 or a modified dying limit, let's say if you have the doom condition and it reduces dying, what you can actually permanently die at below dying 4, you're going to do what's called a recovery check. A recovery check is a flat DC 10 check plus the current dying condition. So if you're dying 1, your recovery check is going to be a DC 11. If you're dying 2, it'll be a DC 12, and so on as you go through the various dying conditions. On a critical failure, you will immediately subtract 2 from your dying condition, or add 2 to your dying condition, I'm sorry. You would do a +2 to your dying condition. So if you were dying 1, you would immediately go to a dying 3. If you were dying 2, then you immediately go to a dying 4 and you are dead. There are certain recovery things that we can do, but that'll be another video that we'll go into. If you just do a failure as opposed to a critical failure, then your dying condition would increase by 1. If you succeed, then your dying condition reduces by 1. So if you were at dying 2 and you had a success, you would immediately go to dying 1. If you were at dying 1 and you had a success, you would go to stabilize, which is a 0 hit points. You're still unconscious. That dying condition would go to your wounded. So if you were wounded 0 and you stabilized, you would go to wounded 1. If you had already died once before and were at wounded 1 already, you would go to wounded 2, and so on along those lines. So keep in mind that as you go down and get healed and go down and get healed, this wounded condition kind of keeps track of all these times that you've been killed and it weighs it against you. So it is not this yo-yo up and down, up and down, up and down, nor do I suggest if you were a healer in a party that you allow one of your players to go down as some kind of tactic. It definitely weighs against the player. The other thing that you could do in order to get out of the dying condition is if you have at least 1 hero point, and you have to have at least 1, you can have more, but it's kind of irrelevant because you won't have any when you're done. But you can see, and I'll go ahead and put it up here, but if you spend all your hero points with the minimum of 1, what you can do is you can avoid death. So you can immediately go to a stabilized condition. 2 big things about this I would like to say is that you can do this in that first round. You're at the top of the next round. If you immediately spend your hero points, then you will immediately stabilize. And if you read this carefully, you do not gain the wounded condition once you use the hero points. So let's say you were at wounded 3 already, and you go down again. Well, you don't immediately gain the dying, you don't immediately, everything gets tacked on until the beginning of your next turn. So if you were to immediately use your hero points as a last ditch effort, you would only go to dying 3. You would not go down to dying 4 and be permanently dead. So hero points are a really good use in order to stabilize yourself, but you use all of them. If you have 1, you use 1. If you have 3, you use all 3. Whatever you have is what it takes. And once you reach that dying 0, then you stabilize. You're still at 0 hit points. You're still unconscious, but this whole recovery check or possibly using hero points, this whole stage is over. So next we're going to go into what could happen when you're in the dying condition and what all that entails. So let's say you're in the dying condition and you have a particularly vindictive monster or one that just kind of had it in for you. Or, in truth, an area effect spell happens, even from your own team members in an area that you're in. You can take damage when dying. Now, as we kind of mentioned at the beginning of this video, you can't really go into negative hit points. However, damage while dying immediately increases your dying condition, regardless of recovery checks or where in the initiative order it is. As soon as you take damage while you're in the dying condition, you will immediately go down by 1. So if a fireball or something along those lines happen within your area and you are affected by that area of effect, then your dying condition will increase immediately. The amount of damage is irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether it was 1 point of damage or a gazillion hit points of damage, because you're already dead. So the massive damage thing wouldn't necessarily come into effect, but you would immediately increase that dying condition. So it's something to keep, track of. You don't, not necessarily for you to keep track of, because you're kind of dead and you don't have any actions, but your teammates might want to keep that in mind when they're fighting around you and doing stuff. So now that we're done talking about damage, we're going to try and see how we can dig ourselves out of this hole of the dying and wounded condition. So you're now in the dying condition. Well, what you want to try to do is you want to try and heal out of it or increase your HP, at least get to 1 HP, simply because then you have actions again. You're conscious. You're no longer have all that -4 penalties. You definitely don't want to hang around in the dying condition. It's a pretty boring condition to be in. Plus, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a little sticky. It can definitely take you down to the permadeath thing, which is not something that is fun to be in. But you can raise your hit points or your hit points can be raised. Let me stipulate it that way. Hit points can be raised by spells, by items, potions. There are certain effects that can do it, as well as, in truth, if combat is over, you can rest in order to regain the hit points as long as you were in the unconscious state at that particular time and someone stabilized you. But sometimes you don't have that opportunity due to active combat or situations such as massive damage. So the dying condition and death can result. So we're going to go ahead and let's say that you were able to get that heal and you're now in wounded condition. Let's talk about what the wounded condition entails. So when you come out of dying, you lose the dying condition, but your wounded condition increases by 1. So if you were to go down again, your dying condition, as we stated a little bit earlier, but your dying condition wouldn't go to dying 1. If your wounded condition was +1, then your dying condition is now going to be dying 2, because you have to bring that 1 wounded condition over. The wounded condition can be reduced by being healed to full health and a 10-minute rest. That is one way that you can totally remove any of the wounded condition, be it 1 or be it wounded 3. You can remove all of that by healing to full and a 10-minute rest. The other thing, and this is easily missed unless you actually read the whole entire action, but treat wounds will remove the entirety of the wounding condition on a success or a critical success. It doesn't matter whether you heal to full or not. One little caveat to this, and it's in the errata, but battle medicine doesn't count for removing the wounded condition. Battle medicine would be in combat, so you can't raise your wounded condition there, even though it is technically just a treat wounds and you're just doing a medicine check, but the battle medicine will not remove that wounded condition. Now that we tell you kind of how to get out of that wounded condition, let's go ahead and go into one more little thing that might affect how quickly you might die, and that is the doomed condition. So here's then that little stinker of a condition here, and that is the doomed condition. If you are affected by the doomed condition, This can come from certain weapons and things of that nature. The doom condition reduces the number in which you are permanently dead at. So your base is, if you get to dying 4, then you are considered permanently dead. If you are doomed 1, that raises it to dying 3. If you are doomed 2, it raises it to dying 2 before you're permanently dead. So the doomed condition, although not super common, it is something that you definitely don't want to have. And it definitely makes the immediacy of being healed and out of combat as quickly as possible just a little bit more important. So there are 2 basic things that can cause instant death. First one, massive damage. If you ever take damage that is equal to or greater than double your maximum hit points in one strike, blow, event, you are immediately dead. It's called massive damage. Not fun. It would be a massive strike. It could be a fall from a 1,000-foot tower. But if you take more than double your maximum hit points, you do not go through the dying conditions and you are just immediately dead. And the other one is there are certain weapons or other things that can have what's called the death trait. If a weapon or something along those lines or spell or an effect has the death trait attached to it, that means once you reach 0 hit points, you do not go through the dying conditions. Wounded doesn't matter. You are immediately dead. Not fun. Fortunately, neither one of these are super common, although maybe if you're on an adventure that takes place on catwalks 1,000 foot above a forest floor or something along those lines, you might want to be a little bit careful. But just 2 things to keep in mind. All is not lost, though. I'll say that. Let's go ahead and get to the next section, which is how easy it is or hard to come back from the dead in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So if you do die, all is not lost. I'm not going to go into detail here. Actually, I think I'm going to be doing a full video on this as to how to return from the dead, because this could double this video length without any problem whatsoever. But there are certain rituals that you can do: reincarnate, resurrect, raise dead. Those things can bring you back from the death. They all have a cost. There are intricacies between all of those. One of them, which would be reincarnate, doesn't necessarily require the body to be there. However, when you come back, you can be any ancestry that the GM decides to put on that little roll list. So it's not necessarily something you want to do unless you want a totally new character. There are also certain feats, mainly in alchemy as well as champion. There are certain feats that can bring people back from the dead. Generally speaking, this is a shorter period of time. We're talking rounds. So it is something that you can come back with. All of these are kind of high cost things, and none of it's going to be cheap. Some of them require diamonds as well as gold. They all require time. Some, depending on how heightened the particular ritual might be, might require up to 16 different secondary casters that all have to make their rolls in order to ensure that this works correctly, depending on how high a level the character you're trying to bring back from the dead is. So this is available within Pathfinder. It is not something that you can discuss with your game master that you don't want to re-roll a new character and you'd like to bring back this one. It could become part of the adventure. It could become a quest. It could become a side run that you guys do that takes quite a few sessions in order to bring a little more depth to it. You might have to go to a higher level settlement in order to find someone who can cast this spell. You might have to go on a huge quest in order to get the diamonds or the material components in order for the resurrection. So there's a lot of role play that, and a lot of adventure expansion that occurs simply because one of your character dies. So it's something to keep in mind. It is not, I was about to use the expression death, doom, and destruction, but it actually is death, doom, and destruction, but it is death, doom, and destruction in a fun way. I hope you did get something out of this video. It is something that, and in my head, death to me, because of the wounded condition, it is always sticky. It is not just something that you can yo-yo back and forth with. So it adds a little bit more, to me, I guess, fun to the combat, simply because there's actually things at stake. But there is always, I want to say always, there's usually a way to come back from it that might be involved, but can actually bring a lot of depth to what you're doing. I do hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something from it. I do hope you got something out of it. You can do if you want to, you could go ahead and like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and hit the little notification bell if you wanted to get notified when new videos come out. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and wish you a good day and happy adventuring. Thanks.